Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving into a chilling true crime case, one of the most brutal serial killers in 20th century America. But what makes this story truly haunting isn't just the number of victims. It's the man behind the crimes, a seemingly polite, well-spoken, and trusted figure, who was, in reality, a cold-blooded killer. Imagine this: you're driving alone on a deserted highway late at night. You see a man standing by the roadside, hitchhiking. He looks clean-cut, speaks softly, seems harmless. You stop to help. And that could be the last decision you ever make. In the early 1980s, a string of young male bodies began turning up along highways in the Midwest. No witnesses. No suspects. No clear motive. All victims had one thing in common: they'd been stabbed dozens of times, then dumped like garbage, as if their lives meant nothing. As newspapers began calling the unknown murderer the highway killer, fear spread across communities. But for years, no one suspected that the man responsible was living quietly among them, a man named Larry Eyler. The most terrifying part: he may not have acted alone. And before he died, he revealed a secret that would shake the American justice system to its core. So who was Larry Eyler? Why did he kill? And was justice ever truly served? Let's piece together the evidence, peel back the layers of his twisted persona, and uncover the truth behind one of the darkest cases in American criminal history. Part 1: The Darkness Beneath the Suit. Who was Larry Eyler? From the outside, Larry William Eyler didn't look like a killer. In fact, he looked normal. Maybe even friendly. To his friends, he was a good guy with a quick smile. To some co-workers, Larry just kept to himself, but he was polite, respectful. He held a stable job, volunteered at a local community center, and regularly visited his sick mother. At a glance, he could have been your neighbor, your friend, even your son. But behind that ordinary facade was something dark, something twisted and dangerous that had been brewing for years. Larry Eyler was born in Indiana in 1952 into a fractured family. His parents divorced when he was young, and the emotional trauma of that split would echo through the rest of his life. His mother struggled to keep the family afloat, and Larry, often described as a sensitive child, never quite fit in. Teachers noticed he was quiet, withdrawn. Some said he seemed lost in his own world. Others whispered he had trouble managing anger. By his teenage years, he began acting out, fighting, skipping school, and, according to one classmate, getting into stuff no one wanted to talk about. What kind of stuff? That would become clearer years later. As a young adult, Larry came to terms with the fact that he was gay. But this was Indiana in the 1970s, not exactly a place welcoming of LGBTQ+ identity. Homophobia was rampant, especially in conservative communities. So Larry did what many others had to do at the time: he lived a double life. By day, he worked various jobs: art student, janitor, house painter. By night, he frequented gay bars, cruising spots, and underground scenes, particularly those involving rough sex and BDSM. In private, Larry felt free. In public, he was always guarded, always watching his back. "If they knew what I was," he reportedly told a friend once, "they'd kill me." But the real danger wasn't society killing Larry. It was Larry killing others. Eyler's sexual identity wasn't the problem. But the shame and hatred he internalized, combined with years of emotional instability, created a ticking time bomb. He began to develop fantasies. Violent ones. Fantasies where he could control, dominate, and punish. And eventually, those fantasies started slipping into reality. "I don't want to hurt them," he told a former partner during a late-night conversation, "but something in me snaps." What began as consensual BDSM encounters turned darker. Eyler started tying up partners against their will. There were reports, never proven, that some men left his apartment with bruises, unable to explain what had happened. At least one man never left at all. By the early 1980s, Eyler had settled into a strange rhythm. On weekdays, he was just Larry, calm, composed, even caring. On weekends, he'd take long drives on highways, looking for hitchhikers or young men walking alone. Sometimes he picked them up for sex. Other times, for something else. And yet, even as bodies began turning up along remote interstates, no one suspected him. He had no criminal record. He wasn't aggressive in public. His car was clean. His apartment, spotless. Police at the time were stumped. It was like chasing a ghost, one detective later said. "We had all these dead boys, all stabbed, all dumped along the highways, and nothing to connect them. No DNA. No fingerprints. No leads." And that was Larry's greatest weapon, his ability to disappear into normalcy. To smile at you while hiding blood under his fingernails. What makes Larry Eyler so terrifying isn't just the violence. It's how well he wore his mask. He wasn't a lunatic screaming on the street. He wasn't drooling in a padded cell. He was your buddy from the community center. The guy who helped paint your fence. A man who, when caught years later, said calmly, "I just wanted to feel something. Anything." In many ways, Eyler wasn't just hiding from the world, he was hiding from himself. And when he couldn't suppress the storm inside anymore, he let it out on those who were weakest, most vulnerable, and least likely to be missed. Larry Eyler was now fully immersed in his double life. One half was smiling, sociable, and perfectly normal. The other half was preparing to kill again. And as we'll see in the next part, the highways of the Midwest would soon become his personal hunting ground. Part 2, The Predator in the Dark, First Victims. Most killers don't start with grand acts of horror. They practice. They test boundaries. And then, when the thrill becomes habit, they enter the bloodiest chapter of their lives. For Larry Eyler, that chapter began in the early 1980s. I was just giving him a ride home. A simple statement, yet one packed with contradictions. Eyler's first confirmed victim was a young man named Craig Long, whose body was found in a remote area of rural Indiana. Craig had just left home after an argument with his parents. He was barely in his 20s. No one realized that would be the last time anyone ever saw him alive. Craig's body was found face down, stabbed more than 20 times in the chest and back. These weren't random wounds. They revealed not just rage, but also signs of a twisted, almost ecstatic cruelty. Larry wasn't arrested after that. In fact, over the next 2 years, he continued to drift across state lines, leaving behind a growing trail of corpses, each one more brutal than the last. "I didn't mean to kill them. I just lost control." That's what Larry said in his later confession. But what chilled investigators wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Flat. Emotionless. As if he were talking about accidentally dropping a plate in the kitchen. Larry didn't kill at random. His victims fit a very specific profile: young men, often gay, often homeless or estranged from their families. Many were picked up outside gay bars, at truck stops, or simply while walking along highways, alone, unnoticed, forgotten. "Hey, need a lift? I'm headed that way too." Just a friendly offer from a tall, clean-cut man with a calm voice and a polite smile. Who would suspect he was a monster? With his soft-spoken demeanor and neat appearance, Larry disarmed his victims. Once they got in the car, things moved fast. He often used handcuffs or pre-tied ropes to restrain them. Some victims had their eyes taped shut, as if Eyler didn't want them to see him, or didn't want to see their fear. Between 1982 and 1984, over 20 murders followed a disturbingly similar pattern: young men kidnapped, tortured, stabbed repeatedly, and dumped on roadsides. But because the killings happened across multiple states, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, local police failed to connect the dots. At first, investigators thought there were multiple killers. No one imagined that one man alone could carry out such an organized, rapid-fire spree of killings. Looking at the sheer frequency, sometimes just weeks between murders, and the recurring signs of restraint and overkill, criminal profilers began to suspect Larry Eyler wasn't losing control. He was following a pattern. Each murder became a ritual. A twisted, bloody ceremony where Larry played both executioner and judge. Sexual overtones were found in many of the cases, raising disturbing questions. Was this about deviant pleasure, or was it hatred turned inward? Some experts believed Eyler suffered from intense internal conflict over his sexuality in a deeply homophobic culture, and his killings were a way to punish himself, and others like him. Despite several close calls, including being briefly detained, Larry always managed to slip through. In one instance, police found handcuffs, knives, and rubber gloves in the trunk of his car. When questioned, he simply replied, "I work security. It's just my gear." And because they lacked hard evidence, police had to let him go. But then, he made a small mistake. One lapse in judgment that would start unraveling everything. And that mistake would bring Larry Eyler's reign of terror one step closer to an end. Part 3: The Mistake That Broke the Mask. For years, Larry Eyler had slipped through the cracks. He crossed state lines, changed his routine just enough to stay ahead of law enforcement, and left behind no living witnesses. But in August of 1983, his carefully built mask began to crack. It was just past midnight when police in Lake County, Illinois spotted a suspicious pickup truck parked along the side of the road. Inside the truck was Larry Eyler. In the passenger seat was a young man, barely conscious, shirtless, with his hands tied. The officers immediately intervened. The victim, visibly shaken, said that Eyler had offered him a ride home, but once they were on the highway, Larry pulled over, tied him up, and threatened him with a knife. Larry was arrested on the spot, and his truck was impounded. Investigators quickly obtained a search warrant, and what they found stunned even veteran detectives. Inside Eyler's vehicle were handcuffs, rope, knives, rubber gloves, a surgical tape roll, an address book with names of young men. But the most disturbing detail? A bottle of hydrochloric acid, which investigators suspected he intended to use to destroy evidence, or perhaps even to torture. In any other case, this would have been the breakthrough. The moment when justice finally cornered the killer. But in Eyler's case, it wasn't enough. Despite the alarming evidence, prosecutors couldn't charge Eyler with murder, yet. The young man in the truck had survived, but Larry's defense team argued that everything found was circumstantial. Worse, the police had trouble linking Eyler to the string of unsolved murders across state lines. No fingerprints. No DNA matches. And with jurisdictions not fully sharing information, the puzzle pieces remained scattered. Unbeknownst to Larry, his time on the outside was running short. Investigators in Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky began to quietly compare notes. Victim patterns. Crime scene photos. Weapon types. The similarities were too strong to ignore. And they all had one name that kept popping up: Larry Eyler. Authorities placed Eyler under tight surveillance. Every move he made, every call he placed, every late-night drive, they were watching. But Larry seemed to sense something was closing in. His behavior became more erratic. He moved frequently, started destroying personal items, and cut ties with people in his past. But it was already too late. Because one of his murders had finally left behind a piece of irrefutable evidence, and it was about to change everything. Part 4, Blood Clues, a death that wouldn't stay silent. For years, Larry Eyler was like a phantom, emerging from pools of blood only to vanish into the night, leaving behind tortured bodies discarded like garbage. The media dubbed him the highway killer, but to law enforcement, Eyler was still just a potential suspect. No evidence had been solid enough to put him on trial. And then came Daniel Bridges. On August 21, 1984, the body of a teenage boy was discovered in a filthy alley behind a building on Chicago's North Side. It was Daniel Bridges, a 15-year-old who had once been a high school student but had since dropped out, drifting through the city's darker corners, homeless and vulnerable. Daniel had been brutally beaten, with multiple bruises and stab wounds on his body. His wrists were bound with duct tape, a detail that echoed previous murder cases. His back bore the marks of whipping, suggesting torture. Most horrifyingly, Daniel was still alive when the final stab was delivered. His death was slow, cruel, and deliberate. This time, the killer made a fatal mistake. At the scene, forensic investigators found a blood sample that didn't match the victim's DNA. It was just one small drop, but it was everything they needed. The blood was sent for analysis and compared to DNA samples collected from Eyler during prior arrests, and the result was a perfect match. But that wasn't all. Forensic experts also found Larry Eyler's fingerprints on the duct tape used to restrain the victim. For the first time, they had direct physical evidence. And for the first time, Larry couldn't talk his way out. "We have no doubt anymore. This man killed Daniel," said one of the investigators during a press conference shortly after. Larry Eyler was arrested at his apartment in Chicago. Inside, the police found evidence that deepened their suspicions: blood-stained clothing, a dagger, and maps marked with locations where other bodies had been discovered. Eyler remained calm, his usual cold, unreadable expression. No panic. No remorse. When asked about Daniel Bridges, he simply replied, "I don't know who that is. What about the blood and fingerprints? I was framed." But this time, the excuses meant nothing. The authorities had everything: DNA, fingerprints, physical evidence, and a murder that fit the exact pattern of a string of killings that had plagued the country for years. In July 1986, the trial of Larry Eyler began. The media swarmed Chicago. In the courtroom, Eyler sat motionless, no emotion, no apology, as if none of it concerned him. The prosecutor laid out every detail. The DNA match. The fingerprints on the duct tape. The murder weapon. The map marking multiple dump sites. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and at the center of it all was Larry Eyler. During the trial, Daniel's mother took the stand. Holding a photo of her son, she spoke in a trembling voice. He was just a child. He didn't deserve to die like that. Every night I dream of him calling for me to come get him. But I never got there in time. The courtroom fell silent. No one spoke. Even Larry's own defense attorney bowed his head. On October 3, 1986, the jury found Larry Eyler guilty of first-degree murder. The death sentence was handed down shortly after. Crowds outside the courthouse erupted in cheers. Victims' families hugged, weeping. After nearly a decade of bloodshed, Larry Eyler was finally held accountable. But, was it truly the end? No. Because bodies were still being discovered. And the questions remained. How many people did Larry Eyler really kill? And was he working alone? Part 5, The Final Confession, Secrets from the Grave. Larry Eyler may have been sentenced to death, but the story was far from over. In fact, the most shocking twist, the part no one saw coming, would only be revealed after his death. Because even though Eyler had been silent in court, behind the scenes, he was preparing a final move, one that would rock the justice system to its core. While awaiting execution at Pontiac Correctional Center, Eyler was slowly dying, not from lethal injection, but from AIDS. As his health declined, he knew he would never leave prison alive. And that changed everything. Facing death, Eyler no longer had anything to lose. So he decided to speak. Through his defense attorney, Kathleen Zellner, Larry Eyler began to reveal details, terrifying, gruesome details, about the killings he had never been charged with. What followed was a bombshell. Before he died, Eyler confessed to 21 murders. 21 young men and boys, drugged, tortured, and brutally killed between 1982 and 1984. The confessions included victims the police had already connected to the highway killer, but also new names, new locations, and new horrors. But here's the twist, he didn't act alone. Eyler claimed that some murders had been committed with the help of another man, a friend and alleged lover, Robert David Little, a respected university librarian and professor in Indiana. According to Eyler, Little helped plan some of the murders, offered his home as a killing site, and sometimes even watched or participated. Kathleen Zellner delivered this confession in 1994, shortly after Eyler's death. The documents included hand-drawn maps, victim descriptions, and chilling written statements. Police, stunned by the scope of the confession, reopened the cases. Many details matched forensic evidence at unsolved crime scenes, dates, locations, and even injuries specific to certain victims. Eyler described things that only the killer could have known. Authorities turned their attention to Robert David Little. In 1996, he was indicted for murder based on Eyler's confession and some physical evidence. But in a highly controversial trial, the jury found Little not guilty, citing a lack of direct evidence tying him to the killings. Once again, justice slipped through the cracks. Even with Eyler's confession, some of his victims have never been identified. Their names are still missing from police files. Their families, if they're even looking, have no idea what happened. In interviews, Zellner described Eyler's final days as haunted by guilt for these nameless souls. He wanted the world to know who he really was. Not to clear his name, but to lift the weight that had suffocated him for years. They were young. They trusted me. I killed them. I deserve to die. Larry Eyler, final confession note. To this day, questions linger. Was Robert David Little truly innocent? Were there other accomplices Eyler never mentioned? And how many victims still lie buried, forgotten, across the Midwest? What's terrifying is that we may never know. Because sometimes, the dead take their secrets with them. Conclusion: he died, but the horror remains. The story of Larry Eyler is more than just the account of a serial killer. It serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a twisted, terrifying face. It often hides behind the most ordinary, friendly smiles. A man who might offer you a ride, buy you a drink, and murder you moments later. Eyler is gone. But he left behind a list of unnamed victims, crimes that were never brought to justice, and secrets buried with him. His life was a trail of lies, violence, and blood, but it also reflects a terrifying truth: how many more like Eyler are walking among us, unnoticed? How many more Larry Eylers are out there, driving down highways, smiling in the rearview mirror, and searching for their next victim? Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this case thought-provoking and want to explore more gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. See you in the next video.